Hello everybody. As ever, let me know if you can see me and hear me. Gonna probably just jump right in today, although I forgot to show this last week, and I'll try to remember to do it later in the show as well for those who come a little later. This was the color I received this year for the breast cancer awareness pink. So this is the classic color that had gone out for many years, and then last year I think they did this color and this. They did a few different pinks. This is the one I received last year. So I don't know if they're mixing it up this year or if it's all everybody's getting this pink, but I just wanted to show those swatches while I remembered because I forgot last week. Did I forget anything else last week? I'm not sure that I did. Well, while I'm showing things, this is the figure of the month. And I'm not sure I kept the thing with his name on it, but clearly he's a vampire. Count Von somebody, I think. Bobby Jackson sculpted this. So I'll just put him back over here for now. Excuse me. And then, of course, the other big happening this month is the Ghoulie bag, which includes some candy that I will not be doing anything with during the show, so I'll put those aside. But I will be doing stuff with the other contents, which is Wolfbane's Purple, Dungeon Slime, those are what the colors look like, and then Cynthia the Wicked, sculpted by Bob Rodolphe. So this is one I'm going to try to get her painted on the show. I think we all know I'm not likely to actually accomplish that. Green User says they got the purple one in their last order, the purple one of the breast cancer awareness pinks. So I will talk about why it's already got some values on it in a minute. I'm going to try to do sort of the quicker version, tabletop version, less stressed version, depends on how you want to look at it, of what I painted here. So following the same basic color selection and whatnot, but maybe not all of the same brushwork. Like I may not do the transition from the light to dark. That can take a little while longer for blending. I'm not probably going to do super shiny boots because that definitely takes longer for blending on black. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. I did this miniature for last year Halloween, and I wrote it down. So if you're interested in seeing this, which is essentially a monochromatic color scheme, but with blue and teal type color instead of black and white, that is episode 18 in the Beyond the Kit playlist that's on Reaper Miniatures YouTube channel. So I'm gonna, I think probably just you could jump in. Oh, and last week, maybe it work better if we do this way. Last week we finished off the details on these zombies. I did not finish my entire zombie horde. You can see some of them I've penned up here in my little holder. And then there's like a whole other, I needed their base, their little handles. There's a whole other bit of horde. So one day I do want to use these as an example of little things you can do to kind of, you know, up a paint job. But I wanted to, you know, stay holiday thematic, so I thought it would be good to paint Cynthia now instead of waiting. My most recent blog post is about how to make colors go together, like how to make colors work together, both not just choosing color schemes. So I talk a bit about choosing color schemes. So for this figure, since I had purple and I had green, there's a triad with orange, purple, green, or a triad. Technically, this doesn't exactly fit the triad. It also technically doesn't exactly fit either of the split complementary color schemes that are recommended. I'm going to talk about that. But the color scheme on the painted figure is very harmonious because of all the other stuff I did. So you don't have to knock your initial color choice out of the park to get the colors to look nice on the figure. So hopefully I'm going to show some of the things that I did. But also I want to kind of talk about dealing with transparent colors. And we will, in fact, verify that that is what's going to be happening for us here today. with some of these. And I did not shake my paints before the show. I knew I was forgetting something. So you will have to endure some of listening to my vortex mixer. All right, I will just use one of these plastic. I reuse my blister packs for little palettes and lots of other things. So I have these swatches on here, so I already know this, but if you don't have swatches and you're wanting to check out one of your colors and see, you know, is it fairly transparent, is it fairly opaque, we have other ways of testing. So in this test, I have the large stripe is, let's zoom out a little. The large stripe is like a full-size Sharpie, and the smaller strip is a fine point pen. You could do a ballpoint pen even too. So you paint over, and like with just a general stroke, how much of these lines is going to show through. Now, you know, a thick Sharpie line is very aggressive. Most paints are going to show through at least a little, because most paints you need 2 coats. But we can see the light line through this color too. So let's take a look at the orange. I'm using pumpkin orange. This was a previous year's special color. If you don't have that one, I would recommend using orange brown. It's not exactly the same, but it should give you a pretty similar result if you want to borrow this color scheme for this or any other figure. So orange. So it also, I mean, I applied, the stroke is thicker at the top. I had more paint. So it actually kind of covers over the top stripe. But let's assume that I was, you know, putting it on a very controlled way. It's a little more transparent that way. And I will do the same thing with the purple. Now we're going to try the Dungeon Slime. Dungeon Slime has a lot of white in it, so my expectation would be that it is much less transparent than those other two. And I painted with it recently, so I actually know what it does. But I'm just, if we're pretending that I've just pulled some colors off my shelf, and I want to kind of see what they do. And I'll do the very controlled stroke thing. And even with the very controlled stroke, it's actually covering, weirdly, it's covering the thicker line. It almost seems better than the thinner line. And that's just some of the weirdness of covering over things with paint. So this isn't anybody ripping you off. In fact, chances are you're getting more pigment in these two than you are here. White is cheaper. People have the same where if paints are transparent, it means they're not getting pigment for their money. That is not true. But I have yammered at you guys about that before, so I will not go into too much detail on that. I will explain why she has these different colors. This is actually primer. I'm starting to feel like Bones USA would benefit from primer. Like the paint goes on just fine without it. Most of the ones that I've painted, I have not used primer on. But I think the paint job will probably be a little sturdier with primer. But the other reason I did that is we have multiple colors of primer. I actually mixed the middle color. So this is gray primer out of the bottle. This is black primer out of the bottle. I didn't want to use straight white, so I mixed a middle color. Instead of considering this my middle color, I mixed a middle color between this primer and that primer. And why did I do that? One of the reasons is because of this transparency thing. So people will say, if you want to paint this color, prime black. If you want to paint that color, prime white. What if you want to paint both of those colors? So one answer is you can just paint gray, and that helps. But you can also customize. Or you can paint what's going to work with the majority of your colors. Say most of your colors are vibrant, intense colors. Use a light gray or a white primer, and then you want to paint a dark color like this purple that's a little more transparent. You could put a slightly darker color on. You don't have to do it with the primer. Like I could have primed this all one color and this is actually exactly what happened when I was painting the pumpkin on the real figure. I'd painted all this stuff and this stuff. So there are like black streaks all over here. So I just painted the whole pumpkin with this Dungeon Slime to get it back to a lighter color, and then it didn't take very many coats of pumpkin orange to paint over it. Whereas if I started painting pumpkin orange and I'm trying to paint my coats to cover up all those streaks and boo-boos with just my actual color, I would have probably had to paint 5 or 6 coats of the pumpkin orange. So that's your first tip, is start with an undercoating, and your first layer, whether it's primer or you paint over it or whatever happens, that is hospitable to the color that you're trying to apply. And the same thing with the black. I mean, it's going to be a lot quicker for me to apply all of the black for her clothing over primer that's black. And this isn't actually the black primer isn't as dark as black paint, and the white primer isn't as bright as white paint. So I do still want to go over this with some black paint. But I maybe can kind of cheat and use it for highlights and stuff. Just apply, like, not feel like I have to apply the whole base coat. We can see if we can apply the highlights and shadows at the same time as I'm pumping up the black. We'll see. And you don't have to use grayscale either. So if I wanted, I could have painted that pumpkin instead of painting it the Dungeon Slime. I could have painted it like a lighter brown, cream like that's decently opaque, or a brown that's kind of a similar value. It's not nearly as orange, but it's more opaque. I could have started with that. Any of those solutions, I would have used fewer coats than just trying to cover everything with coat after coat of this. That's not the only solution, but that is one of the solutions. Messy paper. And begin. Probably with the skin, because it is kind of under and beneath many other things on the figure. And in fact, I painted the eyes. Normally I would probably have just said, I'm going to leave the eyes and do it at the end after the show. But because of the position of the hat and everything, I felt my chances of getting in there and not messing up anything I do now were low. So when I first started looking at these colors, one of the things I thought about for the orange was not so much the pumpkin, I mean, obviously the pumpkin, but also the skin tone. That if I used an orangey color skin tone and I used the purple in the shadows and the green in the highlights, that it would... they're not complementaries, but because they're a triad, are colors that are equally spaced around the color wheel. So it's not going to excite, each color isn't going to excite each other as much as true complementaries, but they're still going to have the property where they kind of draw attention. So to mix that skin color, I did use so I got an orangey kind of skin color and a regular skin color and just mix them together. Which I will go ahead and put my palette on the screen for that. So I could probably also have tried just using my actual orange with the skin color. But I know that this paint is... Wait, I think my camera died. Hold on a minute, I know how to fix it. There we go. I don't know if it's maintained all my settings, but I guess we'll find out. So this is a little more opaque. It's also kind of closer to a skin tone. Or I was just being random. I chose it. I don't know. I did try a few other things. I actually had a color by another company that I liked for the skin tone, but since this is like a Weeper special edition figure, I wanted to try to use all Weeper colors to be able to share them with you guys and have it be things that you can get. So I already knew the color I wanted, and I was just figuring out how to mix it. But the idea was there, and I could have tried the same things if I looked over my Weeper colors, which actually there are some that are kind of like this, but they've been canceled, so I still ended up wanting to mix color. Oh, I did mean to do one more thing before I start putting paint on her, because I guess I just get too carried away with the fact that this camera will do this. So the other reason I kind of did this black and white thing was just to briefly talk about value structure and values. So when we talk about contrast, we most often in miniature painting are talking about the contrast between how dark is that shadow there and how light is that peak, or on her boots. You know, these have high highlights and very dark shadows. That's the kind of contrast we always talk about. That is just one of like 9 or 12, or who even knows how many kinds of contrast. Contrast just means things adjacent to one another that are different. A kind of contrast I think that we overlook, but is also very important for making our figures kind of stand out on the table, want to get looked at on the contest shelf, is the value structure of the values of colors and where you've put them on the figure. So sometimes if you take a miniature and you convert the picture to black and white, you'll find that most of the colors on it are very similar to these like middle grays. So that's gonna, even though it's colorful, it's not as interesting to look at if you have this kind of value structure. So here we have her skin's pretty light, the pumpkin's pretty light, the clothes are in the middle, and then the hat, cape, and cat are really dark. And then also on the back, you've got, you know, the hat band is very light, the hair is in the middle, that's pretty light too. So I just used 3 colors, and this is a way of trying to work with values and how push yourself to do this, that it doesn't matter whether I want this hat, you know, do I decide I want it to be the purple or the orange or the green? It doesn't matter, but now I know I want it to be light so that it contrasts with the hat and people can see it. Is why, one of the reasons I sometimes do that kind of priming. But now if we take advantage of the weird modes, eventually we get to black and white. And you can see that it's not identical because there, you know, highlights have been applied here, highlights and shadows have been applied here, and they haven't been applied here. But the value structure is pretty similar to what I've done over here. So there's like middle colors on the clothes, the hat and the boots are very dark, the pumpkin and the skin are lighter. And it's even more apparent, I think, on the back, where, you know, this figure essentially looks like this figure without shading and highlighting. And that is kind of what I was going for. So that's something to consider when choosing your colors, is not just what color it is, but how dark and light it is. And then where can you place those colors? Because just how I said, you know, the complementary colors excite each other, and even these triad colors are going to excite each other a little more. High contrast in values definitely is something that attracts viewer attention. Get a quick coat on here and then start. The other benefit, I guess, of having these values on here is that in theory, when I miss places, and I probably will because I'm painting on video, it should not be as apparent. That is, yeah, I'll try that brush. I think the first brush was a little small. I do want to try to not gunk up around the eyes since I took the trouble to paint them. But for a minute, I thought I didn't come back out of black and white. Because when I was testing this, you know, getting everything set up before I started streaming, I did forget to do that. And then I sat down and I'm like, why does it look weird? Why does my hand look so pasty? And it was because I was still in black and white. I mean, I guess my hand is pasty because that pasty is more of a value than a hue. She also has skin on her hands, so let's get that in real quick. I am, for the purposes of this video, I painted the figure I did for Reaper as if her legs were skin or possibly stockings. I was kind of not being, I was leaving that open to interpretation intentionally. But for the sake of ease, I'm going to paint it the skin color. And then I guess also, you know, if anyone thinks that's a little too racy on video, I don't think that's, I don't think it's racy, but I know some people prefer their female figures to be more fully clothed. So now we'll have a witch for both camps. I mean, I feel pretty confident this doesn't mess with Twitch terms of service, considering what I see the bikini people wearing on the front page when Twitch is eternally trying to get me to watch the hot tub shows for reasons I do not understand why Twitch thinks that's what I'm interested in, since everything I watch on here is related to art or miniatures. I mean, miniatures are art, but you know what I mean. I'm good with terrain and whatnot too. And I might end up having to paint over some, you know, I might get some of the skin color on the cat and then I have to repaint the black. The whole point of doing the initial value lay-in isn't that I have to paint perfectly and maintain everything. It's to help me make decisions for my color scheme and encourage my colors to apply more easily. Because if you've been here before, you know that I'm a messy painter and that I am not likely to make very much headway with approaches that require extreme precision throughout the miniature. Extreme precision happens, it just doesn't happen the whole time. Alright, so yes, I did not get any skin color on her ears, and she probably would prefer that her ears look skin color, but that's something that I might have to come back to after I do the hair anyway, so I'm not going to sweat it too much. There's kind of no winning in this order to paint things in, because there's always going to be something that's easier if you do it this way, and something that's easier if you do it that way. I'm just going to go with, she likes the eyeshadow. Alright, good enough. Start working on these shadow colors and highlight colors. So in the part of this is related to a blog post that I made recently, and then a blog post that I'm working on, which is how to, you know, get your colors to look nicer together, is the one that I posted recently. And one trick, if you find that introducing a color like this looks too obvious in your shadows, you can start with a darker skin color. Here, we'll go ahead and do that even. You can start with the first shadow is a darker skin color, and then start mixing in the crazy color. And you would be surprised how crazy color you can get in the shadows. And it's not like someone's going to look at it and go, look at those weird purple shadows. The trick is keeping it in the shadows and not getting much of the weird color in the midtones or the highlights. Now I am going to use Dungeon Slime for the highlights. I use Dungeon Slime for almost all the highlights on the official Cynthia, I don't know, the first one. I actually I kind of wanted the skin color to look weird. You know, she's a witch, it's Halloween. And the Dungeon Slime ended up not being quite as obvious as I thought it would be, which was kind of okay. And then I think I did, she's very, you know, she's got a pretty pale skin. I think I did do a little bit of white just right under the eyes, the top of the cheeks, I guess is how you would put it. Top of the cheekbone is where I like to do like my really bright skin highlight. So I said I would start with that, and I will. I'm pretty sure the camera won't focus if I leave that in frame though, so we're gonna go back to just the witch. Somebody's out there, right? I only see Quindy. I haven't missed anyone else. Oh, and Quindy did remind me that this vampire is called, not at all what I said, he's called Casper von Monstein. And she gave you the SKU number, which is 7073, if you're looking for that on the Reaper web store. Because you can just go buy him too. You don't have to do whatever is required to get him as a free figure. You can just go buy your own. I'm just going to go straight into the darker shadow. Because I'm trying to paint quick. Doesn't have to look super pretty. It has to look okay, but quick. Ears tend to have a lot of red, and this purple is kind of making my skin color pinker. So I'm going to go ahead and put some shadow on the ears. Plus your ears are literally being shadowed by the hat and the hair. But in terms of how much highlighting I'm giving her face, I will probably exaggerate that a little, even though she's got the brim of this hat and it will probably be casting a shadow over her. Hey, Bryce. We like to look at faces. So I think I've heard people call it the halo effect. If you look at like medieval paintings, Jesus's face or Mary's face or whoever is the subject of the painting is going to look lighter than everything around it. And that is a very successful technique for making sure that the face of your figure is, you know, something that is drawing the viewer's attention, which, unless you are telling a very specific story, is probably something that you want to have happening. I mean, I can think of stories where the face is not going to be the focus, but for that, if you're just painting like an average single figure, you're not doing some kind of diorama thing, chances are good. The lips on the official one, I still don't know what to call it, ended up being like really one of the toughest parts for me, where I went back and forth on what color to use. Like, I think I repainted them 3 times. Because I just couldn't decide what color I wanted to use. So I'm just going to get some of that straight up purple. And because it's transparent, it's not going to look crazy weird in the skin shadows. It's going to look a little weird. It's going to look crazy weird. I think I actually mixed the shadows that on the one for Ron with a little bit of Kraken ink. It's a slightly darker and slightly bluer purple. And then I ended up not using that anywhere else on the figure, which kind of goes against the points that I'm making about unifying colors and stuff. So I do not want to introduce it. I want to repeat my mistake on this one. Just give her hands a little bit of attention. And then the hands, conversely, I don't want to go up as light in value. I do want to paint them. I think sometimes we don't pay enough attention to hands. The face gives the viewer information about the person's personality, what they're thinking, all kinds of good stuff like that. The hands tell us a lot about what they're doing. You know, she's petting the cat and she's holding the broom. Those are pertinent pieces of information. Often we have characters brandishing weapons or pointing or, you know, other things like that. So I think it's worth giving hands some attention, but I'd never want them to compete with the face, and they're further down the body than the face. So unless I'm painting OSL, where the light's coming from a different direction than above, the hands are also not receiving as much light. So there's 2 reasons, if not more, to paint them, you know, overall to a darker value than you would the face. And I generally won't go as high contrast on hands either. Here on the fingers, I think I need to bring back some of the mid-tone of the skin. I got some of that purple shadow on the top of the fingers, which is very common. So I'm using the side of the brush. I don't think I have my demonstration device handy. If you think of texture being like this, so the texture, the tops of the texture there, and then this is like the crevices in between hair strands or in between, you know, the striations on a piece of wood or whatever. So when you're dry brushing or whatever, you're trying to just hit those tops. You can do the same thing by keeping your brush flat against it so that it's just going to pull. Actually, I'm doing the wrong. Yeah, it's just going to pull some of the paint off. It doesn't have to be dry brushing. You can do it with a round, well-formed tip as well. So yeah, I'm going perpendicular. So I'm trying to get the protruding parts of the fingers to pull the paint off the brush for me so that I don't have to go down into the crevices and potentially get light paint where I want there to be dark paint. So I don't know if it shows on screen at all. The green does kind of show up, but it just has, it's not as obvious in photographs as I thought it would be. Which can happen, and particularly can happen with color type stuff. Because cameras are making their own interpretation of the colors as well. All right, now I will go to the main face. And I'm using the sculpture to pull the paint off the brush to highlight the end of the nose. I'm going from about the middle of the nose down to the end. Which is especially helpful working around this hat. But I do it on figures that aren't wearing hats all the time as well. And now I question whether I put enough shadow on the ears. I can do that same thing on the nose, but start from slightly lower down so that that lighter color is not obscuring all of the previous paint that I added. I kind of, see, I think I did it here. Sometimes a bit careful and leery about highlighting the upper lip on female characters. You can get kind of a mustache effect regardless of whether you're gone darker or lighter. Like anything that makes the upper lip kind of stand out can sort of make the viewer think of a mustache type of thing. I have found, at any rate. At least I, as a viewer, looking at my own thing, is going, why does it look like she has a mustache? That was the reason I identified for that. And now just a little bit of pure white. And I'm not going to put that on the chin, I don't think. Make it just a smidge darker and put a little dot on the chin. I haven't really finished the lips. But since we're trying to quick paint, let's go ahead and try and finish the lips. I might want them to be even. The line. So generally we don't go out of the way to paint the top lip. I will sometimes try to do Cupid's bow thing. It's just kind of, you lift the brush up a little right there. And honestly, if you still find eyes tormenting, probably don't attempt to do that. Because in my opinion, lips are harder than eyes because everything else is done and now we're working on top of it. And that to me is scarier than eyes, where I can paint it first and then just fix it until I like it and I haven't ruined anything. So I'm just taking the skin highlight and mixing it in because I don't want to introduce too much skin tone, but I want to make that lip color a little lighter. Even if she wasn't wearing lipstick, and she is, there would be probably still a little bit of a like reflective glow on the lower lip. But that's one way you can kind of make someone look more or less made up, is if you take that, you know, under the lip thing and you go up to white on there, that's going to look like shiny lipstick. If you use colors that are closer to your skin tone highlights and you don't have as much contrast between the dark line in between the lip and the light highlight, that looks more like a natural look. I think it is past time that I had some black on my palette so I can fix where I'm messing up. So that is the skin pretty much done. Well, I think the next area that it would make sense to handle is all of this clothing, because it's, you know, if I start painting that, I'm likely to get stuff, and then I'm trying to paint the clothing, I'm likely to get stuff on there. And if I'm painting this cat and I haven't painted under her leg, I'm definitely not making my life easy. So we're going to paint this clothing. In the original, I painted the top green and the skirt purple, which I will also do, except I'm going to paint as if she has leggings, and I'm going to make those green as well. And I probably am not going to do that transition thing, because I think I'm just asking to make my life difficult. Definitely not finish this in today's broadcast. But here we will talk about another thing you can do if you're not super confident about mixing colors, you don't want to mix color. I mean, you kind of have to mix a little bit to make this work, but you can just mix on your palette and then test. So we'll say that these are the actual color mixes that I used to paint the green and then also the black. So I just mixed all of that and used it. And I only used white, Dungeon Slime, black, and then I do the shadows of black with blue liner because blue's cool, it recedes. Anyway, we'll get there. So what I want to do is short form this instead of having to mix that all up because I'm trying to paint quick. So I'm going to go to my shelf of paint and look for colors that are similar. This also works for the transparency thing because you are going to your shelf of paint and looking for more opaque versions of your color, but we'll get there. So I identified these colors as close enough. So that is Jungle Moss, Night Highland Moss. I didn't like the Pale Lichen because, you know, we start going a lot more yellow here. So I picked Grave Bloom. So I'm just going to put those on the palette. I'm not going to have that many transitions. I did not have that many transitions when I painted the test figure. And the blending isn't as nice, but I painted that a whole lot faster. So that's kind of the trade-off. Depending on the function of your figure, good enough blending or none at all is good enough. I can also have fewer mixes, but dilute my colors more so that they're semi-transparent, and then they go on, you know, the edges aren't as distinct. That also helps if you watch Anne in the mornings, Monday to Friday. I'm pretty sure that she paints that way a little more, where I keep my paint pretty close to full strength, but I have like 4 million transitions. So there's whatever thing there is way more than one way to crack that egg. I mean, wet blending, airbrushing. There's lots of different ways to do things. I don't think my way is the right way. It's just the one that's worked for me. I do think layering is the most approachable method for people when they're just starting to paint because there's no speed component. You don't have to have special equipment like an airbrush. And also, everybody seems to layer at some point. Even if they primarily use wet blending, they're layering on, tiny surfaces, or they're layering to fix the blends or whatever thing. So I think that from the point of view of it's just a good tool, that it's also good to know for that reason. So what color would I consider kind of the mid-tone of that? I'm going to go with, it's a mix of the Highland Moss and the other one, Jungle Moss. Not worrying about and I didn't worry about it in the priming either. I didn't talk about that with the priming. I did not worry about little details like the clasps that are holding her top closed, or the clasps on the satchels or buckles, that kind of thing. Like, I wouldn't be priming those the value that I was intending to paint them, because they are just going to get covered, and I can figure that out later if I need to. I don't need to know that in advance. And even doing that kind of prime doesn't take ages, but it's going to take a lot longer if I'm starting to add in little buckles and whatnot. And then I almost forgot when I was painting her for real, was that the sleeves are also going to be part of some piece of clothing, most likely her top. And I decided that, so I ended up painting them like the color that the bodice was there, with my thinking being that the transition would have gone down the arms even though we can't see it, and also my thinking being that that made my life easier. That is sometimes how we make the choices. I see a little bit of light that looks too light in here, so I'm just going to stick some black in to make sure we don't end up with color. I did prep this figure a little in terms of mold lines and stuff. I didn't go nuts with it, but I scraped off the majority of them. Because I think she's pretty cool, and mold lines bum me out. Under the Rend. I tend to use colored airbrush primer, the color of the shadow color of the primary color on the figure. I don't know if you were here at the beginning, Valander, but I was talking about how I did this partly to determine the value structure of what each color was going to be underneath. To make sure that I had areas that were light in value, medium in value, and dark in value, and to think about where I was putting each of those and whether that helped tell the story and the character and draw the viewer's eye, as was my goal. So I definitely do not do that all the time. And when I do it, I actually tend to rough in the shadows and the highlights as well as the midtone to give me an overall map. And then I take pictures so that I have that to reference. So it's kind of like doing zenithal prime, but blocking in my bane values. Because the problem with zenithal prime is, I just told you about this value system where you have places that are darker and lighter and stuff. You don't get that with the zenithal prime. It's like the entire person is kind of a mid-tone color, and then there are highlights and there are shadows. I do need a darker color than that. That has ended up being not a very dark color. Oh, no problem, Valander. I was just explaining why she does have this, prime. It wasn't entirely for goofiness. It's also to help the colors cover, because some of the colors that I'm working with, so one of them is the Wolfsbane purple in the ghoulie bag, and then one of the other ones is pumpkin orange that's been a previous Halloween special edition color. They're both pretty transparent. So part of what I wanted to do in painting this on stream was talk about ways to deal with that. And one of the ways is to customize the underlying surface to what is going to work best for that color that you're painting. And you can do that with primer, or you can have like a single color prime, but say I primed all of it gray, which is typically the color I use for primer. I know that my pumpkin orange isn't going to cover very well over that. I can just paint the lighter gray with paint before I begin painting, and I don't have to do it on the priming stage. Hello, Hail JH. Just got in and I have this miniature ready to go next. Trying to decide on colors. Currently a burgundy, red, and marigold yellow are leading. Ooh, that does sound like an interesting one. Reaper chose some of these colors for me because they knew what the colors were in the ghoulie bag, and they wanted the figure to show what those colors look like. So I knew I was starting with Wolfsbane purple. Excuse me. And Dungeon Slime. Well, I took cough syrup before I started, but I think I'm also going to go ahead and have a cough drop. I think the indoor heat is not helping my throat problem now that it's gotten colder. I didn't bring out these wrinkles before. So one of the things I like about layering is the ability to go back and forth. So that transition line isn't great, and the values aren't exactly where I want them is more important. So I can just grab a lighter one and try to fix both those things. And then also here on the leg, I think I got a similar thing going on. I'm gonna leave that there. I do want this to be a slightly lighter color. I mean, it's a middle value. This is meant to be one of the middle value colors. So I'm switching to my just Highland Moss now. Given the color, I think it probably has white in it. So I might need to be careful, do a couple of test strokes, make sure it's not like too opaque or chalky. I didn't do any of those things, but it seems to be working fine. But it is very common to have to add a little water or a little more water as you start getting into highlights that are mixed with or contain white. Come back with the mid-tone color just a little, make sure I didn't lose it all. Now it's it's not drying. That is the downside of layering. I can see that little bit of shine from where the paint was wet. I should not be touching it again. Until I don't see that little bit of shine. And same philosophy for these leggings as with the hands. I'm probably going to bring the highlights up way higher here. This is part of the focal point of the figure. And this is not. I'm thinking I might have to go take more syrup. So just give me 1 minute and I will be back. All right, sorry about that. Let's see where we are. That was just step 1 of highlights. Which I might reiterate sometimes. You do more than one coat with a given highlight layer. There's some neat shapes here on the arm I'm trying to catch. So now I'm going into the colors where I've mixed in some of that Dungeon Slime. So they're going to start having a little more yellow as well as white. And that's going to help it, the highlights pop out too because they're a little more saturated and they're warmer. I often use a color with a little yellow in it. For highlights, it certainly makes sense when painting green, but even for skin tones and stuff like that, I often do that. And I can do the same thing if I think the transition's a little wonky. I can just kind of try to soften that edge. Or I can decide not to care about it. Both are valid. I mean, when you're painting for yourself. I guess when I'm painting for Ron, I don't get to decide. I don't care. And then now I've got pure Dungeon Slime, which might be a little abrupt. I don't know. We'll find out. So for those who came in a little later, one of the things I'm doing to try to make this figure quicker to paint, or if I was someone who didn't like mixing colors, is I mixed all these colors from Dungeon Slime that's Grey Glue, from Dungeon Slime and black. And I think it's actually a great color to highlight black, but this was a lot of mixing. Even if I cut it down a little, you still would have had to spend some time watching me mix. So I was trying Instead, what you could do is you could just do a quick little mix on your palette, get an idea of what the color is, and then I found colors on my shelf that were like kind of similar and was ready to go out of the bottle, which to me makes painting quicker. If I can go out of the bottle instead of having to mix, that speeds it up for me. So the green's not going to look identical, not just because I didn't do the fade thing, but I didn't do the fade thing, which was funny because I had not originally intended to do that. I did a test paint of, testing whether that green and stuff worked. Painted this character, so it had everything but the orange parts. And I sent it to Ron. And then he said, I feel like we need to feature a little more of the green or the purple. So I'm like, okay, I'll make the top the green. And I did a digital edit on the picture of the test figure. And I just, this is just a single dress, but I just colored to like here with the intention that this, we're pretending she has a top. And he thought I was doing a light green to dark green transition, and he really liked it. So I'm like, well, now I guess I have to do light green to dark green. So Bryce is asking whether Corbin just came in, and he did not. He was in the hallway. This is how loud Corbin gets. He's in the hallway yelling at my husband because it is cat dinner time. And he thought we might forget and that he could starve to death because he really looks like a cat who could starve to death. He does a great acting job. I mean, like, if you weren't looking at him, you might buy his story that he is a cat that could starve to death. But if you're looking at him, it's a whole lot tougher to believe. He's been a little too good at that act, and we fattened him up. He used to live on the street, so I think he kind of remembers that time, and he's always looking out for his next meal. Which at least does include mice and stuff, so we have a very good mouser. He doesn't always eat the mice, which I'm okay with. So I think I'll got like enough. Corbin is so neglected. Yes, he's very neglected. So, I mean, it's definitely the overall look is different because I didn't do that transition. But if you look just at the sleeves, the color's pretty similar. Let's get in closer. The color's not like wildly different. So, I can live with that. Now I think and this is, I think, how I painted it. I've got the same, what do I have to paint next so I don't mess up the stuff, and that turns into the boots. And to a certain degree, the cape. Now, the shiny patent leather boots, that's like a whole thing. Certainly can't do it and make it look nice. Like super well blended and stuff. Although I'm seeing on the camera that this looks like not at all well blended. Because that's how my camera likes to make me feel bad about myself, like cameras do. But I can try the quick version. The trick version of doing shiny leather is, I guess, paint some of these, or sometimes you don't even paint them, and you just use gloss sealer. And you got patent leather. So if I were painting this for a game that was, in 5 minutes, maybe I would just do that method. But let's see if we can get a little bit of that shine at least. And that shine is a question of contrast. If you look at the original figure, there are 3 different areas that are painted with this same mix. It's black, and then the green for highlights. And they each have a different contrast range. I'm now reminded that I told you how black primer isn't as dark as real black, and I never did come back in here and put any real black in the shadows. So let's go do that real quick. And I often even do blue liner in the shadows of black. But for expediency's sake, I will not do that. We'll go ahead and clean up the line there though. Lining as well as value, having a value structure helps things stay distinct on your figure. I think I missed a few things here in chat. Bellender has Scheming Rocky up next to paint and does not even remember getting Scheming Rocky, but here he is in my hand. I may have gotten to use the last few dollars of my gift cards. Greymaster is working on gravestones and graveyard fencing, which is very seasonally appropriate. Price Coconut, making going to the bottle too easy can be bad too. Too much drinking. I mean, I think people should be mixing colors, and my latest blog post is a lot about how to do that and that you should do that. But I know sometimes it's not practical, so, or, you know, you're not comfortable with it. So I wanted to look at some alternatives. And I genuinely do sometimes just go grab bottles off. Like I prefer to paint straight out of the bottle and not mix paint if I can. I mean, I'll still end up mixing a little, but it is quicker. It's easier to reproduce. It's easier for me to tell you guys what I did when people ask me about colors. And then I do other stuff that I also talk about in this post to unify my colors and get them to get along. But just straight up mixing stuff together is a very effective method of making colors get along better. But we will be seeing more of that in a different section of the figure. I can't remember if I already put some of this one on. I think I did. So we're going up to the Island Moss, which actually that Moss Triad has always been one of my favorites. I like soft greens. I've not painted with those colors in a long time now that I think about it. So I'm probably not gonna put a lot of this lighter highlight on this leg. It's behind the cat, it's behind the pumpkin, it's behind the fold of cloth. It would be reasonable to interpret it as not receiving as much light. And then also I don't have to try to squeeze my brush in there. Work smarter, not harder. Actually, that is totally not how I paint at all. I paint harder, not smarter. All right, we'll go to the full Dungeon Slime. Just in little tiny places to try to get that shiny leather feel. Because just like non-metallic metal, what is going to make this leather look shiny is having the high contrast between the black and the much brighter highlights. That toe highlight just kind of did get away from me a little bit. It does look like just a blob. So I just want to fix the blobness. All right, there's the quick version of the shiny boots. Now I'm going to work on the cloak, which we compared to the other one. So here's what I was talking about with contrast difference. And I actually went up way lighter on here, I see. I guess I could try going up one more step. Although I'm a little concerned too. So here, this is so light that it really draws your eyes and hopefully distracts, like keeps this area looking interesting enough, because The thing about high contrast stuff and shiny things is that's going to draw the eye, and I finished telling you that this was not a big center of the story. It is a secondary point of interest because of his face. So I'm wondering if I go up much brighter on the highlights on this one, that because the top doesn't have that lightness, if I will be distracting. But I could try. But what I wanted to come over here and look at was the cloak. So you can see there's way less contrast in the I mean, there's highlights. There's notable highlights. But it's not this kind of, it doesn't go up as light, and there's not as many of them, because this I was trying to make look like a matte cloth. It's like a nice soft wool or something like that. The other highlight or bonus to that is it was way quicker to paint that. Even though the surface area of this cloak is much larger, it was way quicker to paint it than the boots. But I said that I would go ahead and try to paint. I lost my white for a minute. Paint slightly higher highlights on those boots. This feels like something I'm going to live to regret. But if you've been here before, you know one of my goals in life is to make a lot of mistakes on screen so that you don't feel as bad making mistakes when you paint at home. Because everybody makes mistakes. It's just a thing. Just a thing. And you fix it, or you decide you can live with it, and that's cool. I mean, I can put a little bit of this lighter color up here in the top area as well. And then these clasps will be some kind of contrasting color and help draw attention when they get painted too. I am often surprised at how much of an impact the little buckles and clasps and buttons and stuff have on the final effect. That I'm thinking something looks kind of blah until I put those in. And then it's not quite as bad as I thought. Alright, there, we upped the shiny of that. And now I will work on the cloak. So there were still like a few, highlighting black is just, it's hard for blending. It's just hard. I think it's especially hard with true neutral grays, actually. I think because that element of color is removed, we as viewers find it easier to see the mess ups. So using non-gray to highlight your black is, first of all, just way more interesting to look at. Neutral grays, a neutral black, yawn fest. But it also may be easier to deal with in terms of the paint application. So I think you can. This is the paint of black, because here are the two colors. This is the color I'm using. So this is black. This is the color I'm using. Does it look wildly different than black? No. I mean, especially not with the annoying shininess on it. Go that way. But when I put it on the miniature, then it becomes way more noticeable. That'll be one of those things of how much do I want to deal with that. We'll find out, I guess. And if you have ever visited my blog before, you may want to visit it again, because I finally sat down and wrestled with WordPress and tried to figure out how to make it much more legible. So it's black on white now instead of gray on white. I think I picked a more readable font. I find it more readable, but that's one of those things that people can vary in opinions on. I got to say my secondary color is purple. Very excited about that. And then the actual blog page where, you go to most people's pages and it has like the first few sentences and of a few posts and you can just scroll through quickly. Mine did not do that. And now it does. Which probably will only help me because I'm continually looking through there to find things I want to link to or whatever. But hopefully will be nice for some readers. So I need enough highlights that we can see, some of the shapes of these folds. Just give it a little, basically just bringing out the shapes more than anything else. But then keep it soft enough that it looks like the kind of cloth that I want it to be. Bob made these folds nice and easy to do with that side. Use your brush sideways technique. I think one more layer. And that, we'll call that part good. Well, okay, I might try to fix the blending situation a little bit. So we'll just get a bit of the two colors to either side on the brush. Switch it around and try to make like an in-between mix. And just fix those edges a little. Just want to visually break them up. And then people won't see it as much. All right, good enough, right? Now the hat. The hat I did a whole other texture again on. And let's look at the hat. And zoom in even closer. Nope, this is close. We can zoom. So I kind of wanted it to look like a felted hat, felted cloth hat. So I did like a lot of little stipples. So I had a brush with a very pointy tip. It was a pretty small brush too. And I did this for like an afternoon. So we don't want to do that. What's the quick method for that? And as I discovered when we were looking at the dry brushes, there are some that kind of do a stipply thing. So I'm going to try using one of those. I am first going to beef up my black a little though. So we get the nice contrast. I can see that it's not. This is black primer. It's not as dark. And I'm not sure the finish is always as nice either. I'm not going to worry if I get stuff on the hat ribbon. That will just be an opportunity to talk about ways to deal with transparent paint later. Because, yeah, I got to get hurrying and I haven't got to the transparent colors yet, have I? And it's possible that I may have been overambitious in believing that I could do this in one show. All right, so I'm just going to use those same colors. I may not use all the jumps because for this you want to see some of like you want to see individual dots, and we're not aiming for a nice smooth transition, so it's kind of a different philosophy. I have a wee tiny stipple brush that I'm looking for, and it's so tiny that it becomes hard to find. I'm pretty sure I'm going to need it at some point. I'm also going to need something. So this one is the Army Painter miniature dry brush. Artist Opus makes these. Rosemary Company makes these. They're goat hair, and it's pretty soft. You still get a stipple stroke out of it. I bought these, and I haven't really used it before. This is bristle hair. So this is like what they would normally use in painting, like in oil painting. It's a much stiffer hair than what we use. So it is my expectation that we'll get even more obvious dots. But let's find it. So I want to get enough of the paint off that it's going to be dots, not blobs. I'm just going to jump up a color. If I have to, I can work in edges later, but I want to make sure that you can see the dots or not. Not be able to be quite as fancy as I was doing it the hard way. But that's okay. This whole piece isn't as fancy as it was doing it the hard way. Now, just as with layering, I need to confine this to a smaller area, surface area, as I go later. There's a little bit of a drop off there that doesn't look totally amazing, but I think I can live with it. Or fix it later, because you can certainly go back and forth with stippling too. Right now I want to be very careful. I'm just going to go up and down. I want it to exceed parameters too much. And then for the very lightest one, I think I will use my itty bitty and also do some cleanup with that. Time-honored skin test. And then I just want to, this looks almost like the transition, if you had a cube and one face, one plane was getting a lot of light, like that's how sharp that edge is, which is not appropriate to the shape of the object. So I need to make where it falls from the light to the shadow a little softer there. It also would not hurt to get a little bit on the edge, I think. So I think that works as the quick and dirty version. These brushes are very annoying to clean, so I'm just going to kind of fill that with water and deal with it after the show. But they're cool to work with. I do recommend them. And this Army pack, the Army Painter pack, you get 3 of these for $20, which seems pretty reasonable. You don't get the super small one. That one I got off Rosemary. Alright, so that's pretty much done with the black and the green. Which so far she's only got like one of our 3 colors on it. Other than a little bit of purple in the skin tone. So now let's do the purple clothing. So on this figure, my original plan was to, this is a mixed version of the purple that's mixed with black and white, gray essentially, to make it more opaque. So my intention was to do these blends and then come over with a glaze of the, full strength purple. I ended up liking the way this turned out, and then I asked Ron if he liked it enough that I could just leave it that way. So her hair, I didn't do it exactly that way. I painted the lighter color underneath and then painted enough coats of it to be this color. So if we take that idea again and say, how do I do that without mixing a bunch of paint? Can we grab some stuff off the shelf that does that? So these are the colors I mixed. I'm going to get rid of these greens before I accidentally use them on something. Well, not Dungeon Slime, because that goes on everything. And these are colors that I pulled off my shelf. You are for something else. So let's see. So that's Sorceress Mist. This is a little more purple. If it's opaque enough, I think that's probably okay. That's Battalion. Those are pretty similar in value, actually, aren't they? We may have to mix the shadow. Live with it. With what? What a good question. Since I didn't bring that anything with me, but that. Guess we'll mix it with black. Oh, for those who missed it when I was showing how I did that with the green, you could just do a little quick mixing on your palette, just a brush full of this and a brush full of that, to get the idea of the color to go look for the bottles that match. That is how you would have the thing to match against. Maybe that was my plan with that layer of purple. We mix that with black. We'll do the going for it thing. So here I probably will do the glaze just so we can see how it works. Because that is another way. So this is another way of dealing with transparent colors, is paint colors that are kind of, similar to that color underneath, and then glaze over it to introduce a stronger version of the color you're trying to paint. Because I'm pretty sure that had I tried to do that with, had I tried to paint everything with the actual Wolfsbane purple, that I too might have turned into a werewolf and gone insane. Not just on a full moon. At least trying to do the blend and deal with the transparency and everything at once. So I was trying to reduce the number of variables that I had to cope with. Let's start with a slightly darker version of the color. I don't know if you could see there where I was covering up a place where I had some black boo-boos from painting the boots, that it covered really well. Which is good. That was my plan, was for it to cover very well. Just gonna, since I was going to paint this darker anyway, I'm just gonna go ahead and jump to the darker color. You don't always have to start, you know, with the mid-tone and then work stuff in. Do a little wet blending when no one's looking. Now here, I do want to be careful. I'm not too sad that I just got paint on the broom, because I haven't painted the broom. Much better the broom than the cloak, which I have painted. Now here, the underside of this, I think I painted it black with my primer, but I'll go ahead and put the darkest purple under there. I don't even get fancy with that. Put a darker purple down here already too, actually. Yeah, I knew I was missing a portion that should be purple. Again, not worried about the cat or the pumpkin, but am worried about the cloak. Looks like I didn't get dark enough primer up here. I'll just put some of that shadow color up there. Now the problem is there's paint drying. Oh, but we gotta put this on our hair too, actually. Now that I recall. Because I love purple hair. Every now and then I think about getting purple hair, and then I think about having to deal with purple dye all over the towels, and it puts me off the idea. Because I am very lazy. Hopefully something here is dry. Let's work on a little more shadow on this underhang. Maybe even go a little bit darker. Necessarily the best at wet blending, but it certainly comes in handy for speed stuff. Alright, I'm content to call that good enough. Let's see if things are dry over here. I think they are. These are not, you know, super deep rolling folds, so I don't necessarily need to go crazy with the contrast. This is more of a rolling fold. So I did go a little crazier with the contrast on these parts on the original. But we'll see how much I tolerate doing that. Do some more cheat wet blending. This fold is more about the highlights than the shadows. So I'm pulling the highlights up to where I want them to be brightest. Where you pick your brush up off of the figure, it often leaves, like, you won't necessarily be able to see it. It's kind of microscopic, I think. But it leaves a little bloop of paint. So where you can, pulling, darker paint down to where you want it darkest and lighter paint to where you want it lightest can help with blending and stuff. And I say where you can because we're dealing with 3D figures, so it's not always going to be possible to move your brush in that way. But I have found that typically when it's not possible, people aren't going to be able to see it much anyway, so it's not something to worry about too much. I forgot to actually mix my next highlight together. And it is perhaps too pale. Because the color with white is very potent, as is often the case. Hey, appropriate, happy Halloween. I'm working on painting Cynthia. That I decided was wicked. I'm not sure why. I think we all know the wicked one is right here. If I'm planning to use a glaze, which when I painted this originally I was and then I didn't, but we're going to try it here. This will allow us to go down the road I didn't pick the first time. I typically want higher contrast than I would want in the final version because the glaze is going to make some of the shadows lighter in value and it's going to make some of the highlights darker in value. So it's compressing the value range. So you need to think about whatever you want your value range to be and then overshoot that a little in this stage. And the glaze will also do some smoothing out. Now it's not gonna fix every little goof I make in the blending, but it does help smooth it out. So I'm gonna try not to stress that too much. Back and add the lighter highlight. think I was getting pretty light at the highlights in this section. Is this dry yet? Yes, it is. Alright, that's looking closer. I don't think I want to go up to the lightest color that I put out. I don't think I want to have that much contrast lower down on the miniature here. I'm just going to smooth this out a little. Actually, I'm going to remember something that I should have done a minute ago. So we want a little more contrast in the hair. So I want to do wash. I painted in the shadows on the other one because that's generally how I do. But we're trying to be faster. So let's do it as a wash. And because I don't wash that much, I mean, I wash me, I don't wash the figures that much. I'm going to do a test for my transparency opacity of the wash to make sure that it's not so thick that it's going to cover over a lot of my stuff. And that's pretty thick. I think I need another drop of water. Well, not thick, opaque. I don't really care about consistency. Sometimes I'll mix washes and glazes with medium so the consistency stays pretty close to paint, but I'm increasing the transparency. That is what I want to do. I'm going to need to do one of these papers soon, I think. So yes, I think that was my first one right there. This is my second one that I can tell it is more transparent. Gel Tip is asking whether I do more glazing, wet blending, or feathering to get your smooth blends. I use layering. Is feathering, see, people use that one to mean different things. If you mean the thing where you get the brush wet and you feather out the edge, I don't do that. That's kind of a form of wet blending. I just take my colors and kind of, you know, either lightly stipple or brush over the edges until there are no more edges. And that can take hours, that approach. I'm not saying my way is the best way, but you do not need to know how to wet blend or use an airbrush to get smooth blends, because I do very few of those things. But I get smooth blends. Right, I'm supposed to be washing your hair, aren't I? Let's do that. Because she has great hair, and I want to bring out all the awesome shapes in it. So pretty much the way you see me painting here is the way that I paint most things. I just have more transitions and I take more time and I fix more edges. Now I'm double checking because I'm very bad at missing places when I do wash. Okay, now I will fiddle this briefly while waiting for that to dry. So this right here is kind of what I do. I just do it longer than any sane person would. And part of the process is paying attention to where things are darker and lighter. It's not just whether it looks smooth and pretty, which is something it took me like 10 years to figure out. I am doing a little less of that here because that is also going to impact speed if I take time to do that. Here I'm not really trying to fix the bend. I am doing that. That entire fold was too dark. So I'm trying to adjust the value. Now I think I need to do the glaze before I look at the pumpkin. But we could talk about the satchels while the wash on the hair is drying. So, one of the other things you can do to help your colors get along is instead of introducing new colors, once you start getting down to the point of stuff like pouches and the broom and the ribbon, like things that aren't your key areas, if you can mix the colors you have to make new colors instead of going out and getting a new color, if the color is mixed from colors you were already using on the figure, it goes with those colors. Like it has to. Because it is made from them. They are literally related. So in the case of the pouches and stuff on this one, so all of the things from this point, from after I finished the hair and the clothing, well, and the pumpkin is just straight up pumpkin orange, but then some stuff in the shading. But all of the little accessory bits I did mix with paints that I already had. But paints that I already had that are somewhat transparent, as we discussed. So, we may be trying to work around that. Where is my purple? Browns and grays are kind of easy to mix. Like, you can't always get the exact one you want, but getting something to be brown is... people complain about making mud when they mix colors. Brown is kind of muddy. You want some mud. So, what I tried was taking orange, which is, a lot of browns are orangish, or based on orange. Take some of my purple and mix it in. And I started getting a very nice brown. So this is the color that I used on the satchels. But I actually did do the cheat that I'm about to show you. Because let's check the transparency of that. Maybe it's not as bad as I thought it was. I think it probably is as bad as I thought it was. So yeah, it is not... It would take a lot of coats to get that to full opacity, even being on the right value. Like I'm making orange tinged gray at this point. So love the color, but do I want to deal with that? Even for the fancy version, I did not want to deal with that. So what I did was, let me just double check my notes. So I used, we can try that thing where we look for a similar color. So radiation burn is actually a very similar color, and maybe it uses those same pigments because it's pretty much as transparent. So no, that's not going to help. Orange brown is similar to the pumpkin. It is a little more opaque, but it's not like super opaque. So what I got was oiled leather, which really, it's not that orangey at all, but I can put orange on top of it. Or maybe we can kind of mix all three together and see what happens. get something that's like at least kind of close to what I want. Because some of these are in there, even though I got a new paint, if I'm putting some of the colors I already had, or if I'm using them as shadows and highlights as well, that counts. That maintains the family relationship type of thing where everybody's kind of related. And on that note, I'm not going to try to make it darker with the purple, although I guess I should have, because that is not very pretty right there. Do I care enough to remix it? Yeah, maybe I do. So possibly I needed to use something like blue liner instead of black. The black just killed it. Which black will do, especially when you're dealing with kind of transparent things. So gel tip, I think my advice for increasing your speed is, to a certain degree, is get over some of the, like on this one, I'm not sweating it as much. And back in the day, like I always tried to paint to the best of my ability. The best of my ability didn't look great back then, but it took the same amount of time and effort as the best of my ability takes me now. So just doing some tabletop miniatures and speed paints, I was like volunteered for a charity speed paint contest, and I never speed paint, so I practiced. Like I'm like, I don't want to suck for charity, so I did a dozen or so speed paint figures under similar conditions to what I knew would be at the event, which is like you only have 12 colors, and I knew that for the charity one with the so-called pro painters, they let us have one brush in addition to the brush that is available for all the speed painting things. So I knew I kind of got to have my choice of brush. But I would pick like 12 colors I thought they might have on hand, because it'd be like a blue and a brown, whatever. And then try to finish the miniature in an hour, and then discover that it was actually 90 minutes or something. But the more I painted them, the faster I got. And the more able I was to live with the fact that they weren't, perfect and polished and amazing. I had another project that I worked on that had this like weird color limitation. Or just how many different color areas there could be on the thing. And that was also one where, it wasn't going to be high quality. The high quality would have been wasting my time and not have contributed anything to the project. So, doing that now and then, doing stuff like this, I've become way more okay with the idea that it doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to even be to the best of my ability, which is not perfect. It's okay to say, well, that blend isn't the most amazing, but are people really going to be looking at that when we're playing a game or doing whatever? So this still takes a few coats, but it's not dire. And I bet the hair is dry by the time I finish that. So I will get to, I have to switch my palette around. Ooh, Green Users wants to paint something. Julie, you want to get painting, but you've got annoying work getting in the way? Dang that annoying work. We want you to paint too. So I like kind of shampoo commercial hair, unless the person is like last week when we were working on zombies. Zombies should not have shampoo commercial hair. All right, I'm sure somewhere there's a zombie story where it would make sense for the zombie to have shampoo commercial hair. I have not yet encountered this zombie story. But it did not make sense for the zombies we were working on last week. So if you really want to see me do quick painting, although it took 4 episodes, but there were 4 zombies, so to be fair, that is a zombie per episode. I think it's episodes 51, 52, 61, and 62 on the YouTube channel are me painting the zombies from the zombie quick paint kit that Reaper put out recently. And one of the nice things about layering, as you get to the extremes, you know, the darkest shadows and the lightest highlights, it's really just small areas, so it gets a lot faster. It's those first few values. And those are the ones that you seem to see the bad blending on more. Like as I start getting more extreme, you would think the bad blending would be more noticeable, but generally speaking, it is not. I do want to go a little lighter overall, I think. Yes, Bob paints something too. We want Bob to paint something too. You guys paint super fun things. I'm just trying to lighten this up a little overall because we are going to be putting that glaze on. And more of the purple color will show through if the overall value is a little lighter. I can't remember. I think I did do that one. All right, we're going up to the brighter highlight. I do sometimes go up to white on here. This is kind of a movie purple. Now on the, one thing that I'm doing a little differently here than what I did on the Reaper version is I used the Dungeon Slime in almost all the highlights. Painting the figure in here, I was grabbing stuff off the shelf. And using, you know, I talked about how using colors in the shadows and the highlights helps unify them. So I'm losing that effect a little by not using my mixed colors. But glazes are a good way to add it. And I do that a lot in my day-to-day painting. If anything, Cynthia stands out, the Reaper version stands out because I don't think I did do a lot of glazes on her. Whereas normally, I'm all about the glazes. And that's one of the big reasons I do them. If I don't go in with the color plan, which is often not uncommon. So if I introduce the color later and I want to make sure it goes, I will start putting some of it via glazes elsewhere on the figure. And let's do that now. Let's do this Wolfsbane purple as a glaze. I'm going to go ahead and actually do it on no glaze thing, even though I did the wash on my palette. I'm going to use just a little bit. Brush on sealer to keep it from being super watery feeling. It's still transparent, it's still making it more transparent. And this, in fact, is so transparent that I don't know that I need to thin down a crazy amount. Thin down just a little more. Because the thing about a glaze is you can always go back and add more. Once paint dries, you can't take it off. So you want to err on the side, and with washes, you want to err on the side of too thin, can't see it, do it again. As opposed to, oh my gosh, I just covered everything up. Now I have to paint everything again. Ron is a menace. Ron is the reason we aren't getting awesome Julie and Bob painting. Dang it. Dang you, Ron. So it's subtle. It's less subtle in person than it is on the screen. But if it's too subtle, like I said, I can just let this dry, which will be moments because it's very thin, and do it some more. Let's see if we can kind of see a difference between this side and this side. And I feel like I do. I need to do her hair so that that part can dry, and we can do that visual comparison again. Because that can be the thing about glazes. It can be so subtle that you can't tell you did anything. If you cover up all of the, once you've covered up all of the color that you're applying them to. So if I had painted her skin with normal skin colors, I could use this and work it in. And I very often do this. Instead of mixing it directly into the shadow. So there are lots of different techniques to use to accomplish that. Mix and mingle these colors. Get some of this color up on some of that color, and now they have to be friends. All right, so now we can compare that side with that side, and you can see it's a little richer. But maybe not enough. Maybe we do need more. You can probably also see the thing I was talking about where, my highlights aren't quite as powerful now. Even though that's super thin paint. It doesn't take a lot. Dim those highlights. It is also making the shadows less dark. Shadows are easier to add back in, I think. Now we're starting to get a richer color. I think I did need that second coat. The hair is not quite dry, so I can't do it on the hair yet. We're back to things not being dry, so I'm going to switch over to the pouches that now need some shading, I think. And I'm going to use that same purple. Because this way, the fact that I cheated and had a little bit of a different brown will be, we're blending that newcomer in. Bringing them to the family picnic and making them get to know everybody. Very hard to paint around that little cat's ears, so I'm glad that I have not painted him for real yet. Now, I did not paint the cat with the same green highlights I used on the other black things. Gray Master, I feel like that could be Reaper class title. How to make colorful friends. Any friend you make at ReaperCon is going to be a colorful friend. I think we can all agree on that. Even if they don't paint. I'll give this side a second coat. And I'm now reminded that I did not actually put this into the super deep shadow, where it probably won't have a huge effect, but it might unite that a little. Is her hair still wet? I think it's dry enough that I'm going to go ahead and put on another coat. If you are doing this later on your own figures, I do advise that you wait until there's like no shine from wet paint in any crevice before you apply the next coat. it is better safe than sorry. And usually there's some other part of the figure you can be working on, as I am. Other than it's going to take forever to be able to put the second coat on there, apparently. But I can make highlights on my pouches now. And there I do want to, you know, because we're making friends, I do want to use my Dungeon Slime. Wait, that was Dungeon Slime, not the other one. Yes. So then if you take the idea of the everyone being friendly and getting along to like the most extreme conclusion, it's that you have a small palette of colors and you mix everything on your figure from those colors. And that palette doesn't necessarily have to be, you can mix all the colors. I mean, sometimes you can have a limited palette where, you know, you're just not going to be able to mix anything pink or some other colors. And that's fine. You just mix like the closest version. And it will go and it will look right because it's like everything is being lit by the same light source in a way. When you have the limited palette and you just, those are the colors you have, it's kind of that effect. So you can have something like where you have a bunch of really warm colors. Say you have a bunch of yellow and red and orange, and you don't actually have blue, but you have a gray. The gray will look blue just because of the contrast. Like it's so much cooler than all those oranges and reds and those hot warm colors. The gray will, people will kind of see it as blue. And you've seen optical illusions like that probably where, you know, it'll be like, this is actually this color. And you're like, no, how is that true? And they're manipulating stuff like those color relationships, like values, and the way that our eye does that it kind of just fills in. Well, I think this should be here. So your eye just puts it in. If you go to the blog post, I have links to some articles by James Gurney and videos by James Gurney where he talks about limited palettes, and he calls it Gannett masking, where you pick out like a shape of colors on the color wheel and you can only paint the things with those colors. All right, so I think that's the pouches done. And so it's just that middle section needs the glaze. Then we're on to the finishing part, which I am a little over time, but I wonder, I don't know that I can get all the orange done, but maybe I can just start some of the orange. The browns for the broom, the brown and the cream, I ended up mixing those, and it was a lot of mixing a bit of this and a bit of that until I got there. So I don't think I actually messed up the pumpkin as much as I did when I was painting this for real. How astonishing. So let's try my pumpkin orange over this lighter patch of primer and see if it is going to go on better. And I believe that it is. So when I painted the other one, and this actually worked pretty well, I cleaned up the area of the pumpkin by just painting the whole thing with the Dungeon Slime. And there's a lot of white in that, so it cleaned it up nicely, and then the purple went over it pretty well. I mean, not in one coat. This is never going to be a one coat color, but in fewer coats. And that is another, you know, thing that you would do with speed painting, is you get to know your colors, or you put swatches on them like I do here, or you have swatches through some other system. So like I would never pick this color for speed painting. I just would want something that has a lot bigger coverage. I would just live with the fact that I couldn't make this exact color combination. On my speed paint, I'd make probably a duller orange and purple version. And then I guess if I really cared, you could come in and glaze with the orange the same way I did with the purple and introduce some of those more intense colors that way. Because glazing does not take a long time, in my experience. I mean, I had to do 2 coats just there, but we were waiting for the paint to dry longer than we were applying the paint in that scenario. Oh, I do have the hat or the hat band that needs to be cleaned out. Because if I try to put this orange over here, it's going to take a minute to paint over that. Put the dungeon slime there instead. I mean, I can't paint over it. It's dry. And I'm not going to worry about being messy because a little black lining is only going to improve this anyway. So I can clean that up later. If I weren't rushing, I might be a little more careful. But we're so close to finish. Okay, not really, because we don't have the broom and we don't have the base, but are those the most interesting parts of the miniature? I can show some of this was me mixing, like figuring out how to mix colors that I could use for the broom handle. And bristles, reeds, I don't know what you call that part of the broom. And I did end up bringing back in this color that I had used on the skin. So it is part of the color scheme, the colors that are on the miniature. That didn't seem like cheating. In fact, it seemed like working that color in a little more instead of having it only on one place. Yes, I've not painted the top of the pumpkin either. And there I did mix a green, but it wasn't green enough. So I did end up adding this ancient oak. And then I used the dungeon slime to highlight it, so hopefully that blended it in. That is one of the, where I end up having a problem with limited palettes sometimes, is if I haven't included a blue, something kind of blue and something kind of yellow, and then I need a green for something on the base. That doesn't always work out for me to try and mix it. I mean, I use blue liner on almost all of my figures, and I did use blue liner on Cynthia. But it is such a dull blue that it does not mix great greens, I have found from many experiences. So there on the second coat, it's already, I mean, I would probably give it one more, especially if I'm painting like the figure for Ron, but it's pretty close with 2. If I paint it over a light background. Then I just think it will be interesting if we contrast the pumpkin as it ended up with this one. So it's a little yellower in the highlights, and then it's got that purple in the shadows because I just used those 2 colors to shade and highlight. If you look at them in real life, they are brownish green. Oh, the pumpkin leaves. Yeah, maybe that would have made sense. I do often look at reference. I don't know why I didn't for this particular moment, but think I just didn't think of it. Because they're like pumpkins have kind of vertical texture. So I didn't like go nuts trying to depict that, but I use brush strokes in that direction for both the shadows and the highlights to try to show that. And it actually, I wouldn't say that it takes a long time to paint that way. It's not quite as fast as the stipple thing because I haven't found a brush that will magically do it for you, but it's a similar concept to that. Like, you're making texture, so it's not like you're expecting it to be perfect and seamless. Like, you're deliberately adding lines, so they look like lines, but you get enough of them and it looks right. Now the problem with it is that this is like a tough location to get to with the brush. But I can come back over that edge with the straight pumpkin if I overshoot because I can't reach. I'm not doing as many striations as I did on the other one because this is the quick and dirty version. I want to make sure to get kind of like extra purple in the lines that are sculpted. So it's not just the lines I'm adding through paint are much more minor than the sculpted lines. I feel like I had a brush with a better point when I did this on the other Cynthia. I don't know what's up with this brush. Oh well, we're just gonna live with it. A little bit of shadow from where the leaves are hanging over. And also just to help it be a sphere. And I use the same color scheme on the hat band, just with smoother brush strokes. Then I'll mix some highlights with the Dungeon Slime. That it has a lot of yellow in it, so it actually works pretty well to highlight the orange. Perry was saying that the leaves on pumpkins are a very strange color, which they never seem to. I guess they don't survive. To come, every now and then you'll get a pear or something that still has a leaf on it, but I don't really remember seeing a pumpkin at the store that still had a leaf on it, or even a gourd. For some reason, I now have a tradition of going and buying a frankly unreasonable amount of decorative gourds every fall. Just like them, decorative gourds. I don't know why. The striation lines are a lot easier to see with the mixes that have the Dungeon Slime in it because it's more opaque. I did pretty much just ring the bottom of his mouth with straight Dungeon Slime. I'm not going to do that now because I probably will go fix the inside of the eyes and the mouth a little more to finish this up. I mean, she's so close to finish that I think I pretty much have to finish painting this at some point, even if I don't do it on stream. And we can kind of try to think about where to put the highlights and shadows to accentuate the cranky evil of this pumpkin. On the face part, I mean it. Over here, I'm not really accentuating cranky evil on his sides. So I will be fixing the mouth, just not today. And that's getting pretty close to the way the other pumpkin looks. So I think I'll leave it there so I don't keep you guys all day. The broom, it was just more complex mixes. It wasn't just the orange and the purple. I think I had to introduce some of the other colors that were used. But also you could totally just do the same thing that I've done elsewhere. Like I could paint the bottom of the broom with something like this, and then, you know, use the Dungeon Slime for dry brushing and introduce it that way. Similar thing on the handle. The base I actually did just paint plain gray. Well, it's a slightly blue gray. And I use this same gray, I'm pretty sure, to do just a few highlights on the cat. To keep the cat black. I mean, if you've ever had a black pet that you try to take pictures of and then you have like a black blob. So you have to keep the highlights pretty small to keep the animal looking black. So I painted the base with this, but then, you know, I did some washes and just dippled on some of the other colors, some of the brown from the pouches and stuff, I think. To, again, you're introducing the colors, you're making them make friends. Well, you're making them family. Even if they don't like each other, they're related now, so they have to get along at least enough for mom not to yell at them. So there are the two versions. I mean, they are different because I didn't do that color fade thing on the bodice, but, and also because one is finished and one is not. The difference in the hair is that I didn't actually do glazes on this. I painted it with the purple, like I used on the dress, and then I painted enough coats of this over that it was really just the Wolfsbane purple, and then I used the Dungeon Slime to paint the highlights, so that's why it went a little pinker than it did on this side. Which, I mean, I like both. This is a truer purple. I like all the purple, really. I don't think there's a purple color I don't like. That would be insane. So I'm pretty sure that Quindy's going to be able to find us a raid of someone else who is doing cool things that miniature painters enjoy. And I will be doing something else seasonally thematic next week. Be mysterious. But because I don't, you know, she's so close to done, I think I'll just finish her in my own time sometime and not make you watch that. Grey Master is right that it is hard to go wrong with Reaper Purples. All right, I'm going to let Quindy pop up the raid, and then I'll put my farewell message on. Thank you all for hanging out with me and putting up with the coughing voice thing. See you next week.